Welcome to Sino-Warfare with Ralph D. Sawyer. Today we come to the innovative topic of configurations of terrain. D, Xing, earth plus shape or form. The art of war devotes 3 chapters to them and offers additional observations in several others. There's also a lengthy section in the Tang Dynasty Tongdian called 9 Configurations that purports to preserve additional characterizations from early times. I've appended a complete translation of that to my single volume Art of War, if you're interested. However, the sophistication of the passages and their similarity to the style and subject matter of the 6 Secret Teachings, a later Warring States work, suggests that while they fall within the tradition, they stem from the Middle Warring States period. Even though Western commanders sought to exploit the terrain to their advantage, it's a subject unique to Chinese military thought because the Western texts rarely match specific tactics to distinctive features. This is somewhat puzzling because anyone who's trekked in the mountains quickly learns the painful lessons that difficult terrain can inflict. Wetlands and dense vegetation apart, even a grade of a few percent can quickly exhaust people and separate groups making an ascent. Since maneuvering a company of troops with differing physical skills and endurance levels is complicated enough without environmental hindrances, 50 or 100,000 soldiers on foot face almost insurmountable problems. Yet, as numerous campaigns have shown over the centuries, generals tend to ignore topographical issues and expect their men to duplicate Hannibal's wintertime crossing of the Alps, with or without elephants. Numerous historical accounts show the Spring-and-Autumn commanders were already implementing terrain-based tactics before Sunzi's time. For example, they scrupulously avoided configurations known to be fatal to the army, including wetlands and sinkholes. Nevertheless, Sunzi seemed to have been the first to systematically study how the terrain's characteristics inescapably impact technical choices, and to match operational principles to various configurations. As already noted, the first chapter includes Earth among the 5 major factors that need to be evaluated. Earth is kind of redefined as encompassing far or near, difficult or easy, expansive or confined, fatal or tenable. A total of 8 different terrain categories. It is therefore necessary to ask, according to Sunzi, who has gained the advantages of heaven and earth? Here, of course, heaven refers more to the climate and the weather than the nebulous entity where the ancestral spirits were supposed to reside. In configurations of terrain, Sunzi clearly outlines the critical role that the terrain and knowledge of it plays. Quoting, configuration of terrain is an aid to the army, analyzing the enemy, taking control of victory, estimating ravines and defiles, the distant and near, is the Tao of the superior general. One who knows these and employs them in combat will certainly be victorious. One who doesn't know these, nor employ them in combat, will certainly be defeated. Separately, he also said, the 9 transformations of terrain, the advantages deriving from contraction and expansion, and the patterns of human emotion must be investigated. In 9 terrains, another of the focal chapters, Sunzi states, one who doesn't know the plans of the feudal lords cannot forge preparatory alliances. One who doesn't know the topography of mountains and forests, ravines and defiles, wetlands and marshes, cannot maneuver the army. One who doesn't employ local guides will not secure advantages of terrain. One who doesn't know any of these 4 or 5 cannot command the army of a hegemon or a true king. Another reiteration might also be recalled. Knowing that the enemy can be attacked, and knowing that our army can undertake the attack, but not knowing the terrain isn't suitable for combat, is only halfway to victory. Now, commanders are even admonished to, quote, determine the enemy's disposition of force in order to know the tenable and fatal terrain, no doubt on the assumption that the enemy will have occupied the most advantageous ground. In Sunzi's view, the nature of the terrain fundamentally affects the strength of the forces that should be assigned to the effort.
Terrain gives birth to measurement, measurement to estimates of forces. Estimating the forces gives rise to calculating the number of men. Calculating the number of men leads to weighing strength. Weighing strength gives birth to victory.
Furthermore, certain terrain-based axioms apply to maneuvering the Army in general. For example,
Now, the Army likes heights and abhors low areas, esteems the sunny and disdains the shady. It nourishes life and occupies the substantial. An army that avoids the 100 illnesses is said to be certain of victory. Where there are hills and embankments, you must occupy the young side, keeping them to the right rear. This is to the Army's advantage and exploits the natural assistance of the terrain.
9 terrains are commonly associated with the art of war. However, generals are admonished to investigate 2 distinct enumerations. The first list of 6 includes accessible, suspended, stalemated, constricted, precipitous, and expansive, while the second one of 9 claims dispersive, light, contentious, traversable, focal, heavy, entrapping, encircled, and fatal. Overall, the art of war describes more than 20 distinct configurations, several deadly land formations, and a number of natural obstacles, including mountains and rivers. While the descriptions are marked by some repetition and variation, there aren't any real contradictions. In addition, some of the broader categories, such as easy and difficult, can subsume the more detailed ones. For example, difficult terrain obviously encompasses mountains, ravines, wetlands, and dense forests. Similarly, entrapping terrain, while fairly unique, easily includes the entire range of dangerous and fatal configurations, such as deep gorges and pit-like areas. In both cases, the best advice is to avoid them. But if this isn't possible, to move through quickly. However, in contrast with later texts, commanders are rarely advised to try to compel the enemy onto difficult terrain or exploit it, such as by turning constricted valley floors into killing grounds. Conversely, Sunzi does advise there is terrain for which one does not contend. Understanding these configurations and their tactics can really only be accomplished by studying the text itself. However, to give a sense of their specificity, I'd like to present a few of the more important categories in a sort of abridged, synthesized format. So we'll put a lot of text up.
Land surrounded on 3 sides by the feudal lords. Where the 4 sides are open, whoever arrives first will gain the masses of all under heaven, is focal terrain. Form and solidify alliances and unite with your allies. If we can go forth and the enemy can also advance, it's termed accessible. First occupy the heights and the young side and improve the transport routes for provisions. If, when we occupy it, it'll be advantageous to us, while if they occupy it, it'll be advantageous to them, it's contentious terrain. Rapidly bring your rear elements forward, but do not attack. If we can go forth, but it'll be difficult to return, it's termed suspended. If they are unprepared, go forth and conquer them. But if the enemy is prepared and we sally forth without being victorious, it will be difficult to turn back. If it's not advantageous for us to go forth, nor advantageous for the enemy to come forward, it's termed stalemated. Even though the enemy tries to entice us with profit, we shouldn't go forth. Withdraw and depart. If we strike the enemy when half of them have come forth, it will be advantageous. If we occupied constricted configurations first, we must fully deploy throughout them in order to await the enemy. If the enemy occupies them first and fully deploys, do not follow them in. If they do not fully deploy, then follow them in. If the enemy is fording a river to advance, do not confront them in the water. When half their forces have crossed, it will be advantageous to strike them. Where the entrance is constricted, the return is circuitous, and they can strike our masses with a small number. Or if you have strongholds behind you and constrictions before you, it's encircled terrain. Make and employ strategic plans. You must quickly get away from deadly configurations of terrain, such as precipitous gorges with mountain torrents, Heaven's Well, Heaven's Jail, Heaven's Net, Heaven's Pit, and Heaven's Fissure. When we keep them at a distance, the enemy is forced to approach them. When we face them, the enemy is compelled to have them at their rear.
The art of war also includes a brief section that analyzes the enemy's emotional state as it invades the enemy's territory. For example,
When the feudal lords fight in their own territory, it's dispersive terrain. When the troops have penetrated only shallowly, they will be inclined to scatter. Do not engage the enemy. When the army enters someone else's territory, but only shallowly, it's light terrain. Group the men together and do not stop. When the army penetrates deeply into enemy territory, bypassing numerous cities, it's heavy terrain. When the troops have penetrated deeply, they will be unified. Ensure a continuous supply of provisions and plunder for them.
the nature and deliberate exploitation of fatal terrain, another critical category, will be discussed later. Next, we will consider the tactical principles that should govern the practice of warfare. As always, thank you for being with us. And if you're so inclined, please consider becoming a subscriber so as to ensure our continued visibility.